mentioned, my name is Stephanie, and I'm one of the staff speech therapists here at the Milwaukee VA Medical Center. I'm going to kind of start with the first half of today's presentation, going over swallowing and speech with persons with ALS. And then we'll have Kellie jump in on the latter half to talk more about the devices that we could use for those speech deficits. I myself am one of 2 speech therapists that work in that ALS clinic. We are here to help make modifications to the speech and swallow function throughout the course of one's ALS. We can do things such as evaluate swallow function, provide swallow techniques and potentially diet modifications. We can provide potentially some communication strategies or even establish use of that augmentative and alternative communication method. And you might see that as AAC, and that's just an alternate communication method. And like I mentioned, our treatment is mainly more so symptom management and occurs over the course of one's ALS. Okay. So just to start us right off, we're going to jump into swallowing. So dysphagia is the technical term, but simply put, it's difficulty swallowing. And there are some early symptoms you might notice, as well as some progressive symptoms later on. But just to go through some early symptoms, you might find yourself throat clearing a lot when you're eating or drinking. You might be coughing with food and liquid, maybe even on your saliva. It might be troublesome to swallow pills. You might feel like food is sticking in your throat. And progressive symptoms could be that of eating takes longer. Chewing is more labored and potentially even incomplete. You may find that food is just left over in your mouth. You may become more fatigued when you're eating or drinking. You might now see frequent coughing when you're eating during mealtime. You may become more short of breath or even have the loss of food from your actual mouth. And like I mentioned, dysphagia is that technical term for difficulty swallowing, but what it really means is when food goes down the wrong pipe. So it goes towards your lungs, and we don't want that. We want the food and liquid to travel safely down the tube that leads to your stomach. From what we can find in research, around 85% of those that have been diagnosed with ALS will experience some sort of dysphagia. If you have been diagnosed potentially with a bulbar onset, you may be experiencing dysphagia earlier on in your disease versus more later on as the disease progresses. So what does that mean? So swallowing symptoms are very important to monitor for because it can lead to potential further medical complications. So if we're having trouble swallowing, we might not be getting in our enough calories. We might become dehydrated. That can lead to weight loss. That can lead to potential loss of muscle mass as a whole in your body. And like I mentioned, if food and liquid are going down the wrong pipe, that fancy term is aspiration for when that would occur. That could further reduce your pulmonary functioning or could even lead to something like pneumonia. So we as speech therapists have a very important role in that dysphagia or difficulty swallowing. What we would do is we would want to evaluate the swallow function. We can recommend compensatory strategies, maybe consistency or texture modifications. We definitely want to provide education regarding that dysphagia. We want to monitor along with the dietitian and neurologist, make sure you're efficient and you're swallowing safely. If we can, we want to help with that saliva management. And we want to recommend or be able to recommend the best method for you to take your medications safely. So how we evaluate one's swallow function is what we would do. It's called a video fluoroscopic swallow study. You may also hear it referred to as a video swallow study. Here at the Milwaukee VA, we are capable of doing this, and so as Fredert. It can be done on an outpatient basis. And what this video swallow study does is it allows us to directly examine one swallow to determine the best management for that individual. So we can trial different modifications, maybe positioning wise. We can trial different types of food, different types of liquid, and we can see what is the effectiveness of this change on the swallow safety. Because the goal is, if we can, we want to make sure nothing's going down the wrong pipe towards the lungs. So we can try a few different things for that. And the video swallow study just helps determine that risk for things to go down the wrong tube and what's the safest method of intake. And I should mention that what a video swallow study is about is essentially you would come here, if you're coming to the VA, it's in the X-ray department. We would bring you back in the, into the X-ray area, and it's essentially a moving X-ray. So we take motion pictures while you're eating and drinking. We would like, if possible, for you to stay seated upright. So you're not standing, you're not laying down, you're just positioned fully upright if able, and we give you different things to eat and drink and watch those on the X-ray machine. So some things we could recommend, I mentioned that consistency change. So for example, maybe instead of regular foods, we're finding that that soft solid food is easier to chew and less fatiguing. Or maybe even like a puree food. So any of the food you get is all blended up. We could potentially, if we find that like that thin liquid, like the water consistency is going down the wrong pipe, we could try thickening the liquid. Here at the VA, we have nectar thick liquid is one type, and then honey thick liquid is another type, and their names kind of say how thick they are. So honey thick liquid will be thicker than the nectar thick liquid. We could also try behavioral changes. So potentially maybe a chin down posture may be helpful in improving swallow safety. Maybe just controlling how fast we're eating. So eating and drinking slowly. Maybe smaller bites and smaller sips are more benefit. Swallowing a few times potentially. We find with those that have ALS, potentially getting the bulk of your calories in the morning when you feel overall stronger might be more beneficial, or frequent smaller meals throughout the day. The overall goal though, if we can, with swallowing is to maintain one's weight. We want to maintain energy conservation, make sure we're not becoming as fatigued as we could be, and we want to minimize that risk of aspiration or things going down the wrong pipe towards your lungs. There are some other solutions to those that have that difficulty swallowing. There could be an option if we're finding on that video swallow study that unfortunately anything we do, so regular liquids, thick liquids, blended foods, solid foods, if we find nothing is really truly the safest, we could potentially recommend an alternate method of nutrition and hydration, which would be a feeding tube. There are a few different types of feeding tubes out there. You could have a PEG tube, it might be referred to as, or a PEJ tube as well. There are times where you can still be eating and drinking, via mouth, but you have that tube feeding to supplement that intake to make sure overall you're getting enough calorie and, hydration in per day. So balancing the two. But I know that the timing of a feeding tube is important, and that's something you would discuss with your neurologist, your dietitian. It's important. You have to have a certain respiratory capacity for it. We want to make sure your overall general condition is well enough that you could undergo the feeding tube placement.
Not here, she's downstairs.
At lunch still?
And like
or?
I'm
Done with lunch, probably outside.
Okay, thanks.
Kathleen, can you mute everybody except for Stephanie, please? Thanks.
There we go. Okay. So, like I mentioned, the neurologist that you're working closely with and the dietitian will be your two go-tos if we feel feeding tubes are going to be a benefit, because they kind of have the final say on if it's okay or if it's not okay. And the other option is, if we're finding we're having difficulty swallowing, you can potentially just continue eating and drinking as you wish, without any feeding tube supplement as well. Like I've kind of already touched on, there are some benefits to tube feeding. We want to make sure we're optimizing one's nutrition and hydration. So we can, like I said, still get the pleasure of eating, but we can also have the tube feeding for the bulk of your calories. It can be beneficial as a decreased risk of muscle loss. Hopefully your weight would stabilize. This also could be another method that you could get your medications in. You may not be able to take them orally through your mouth, so maybe putting them through the feeding tube is just the more optimal, efficient manner. And the hope would be too that with that tube feeding, there's a decreased amount of stress for the person with ALS as well as the family, especially if they're worried about that inadequate nutritional intake. So moving on from that, a lot of my veterans ask me if there are any exercises they should be doing with their ALS diagnosis. And from what we can find in regards to speech and swallow therapy directly, there's been limited research on benefits of actual active exercise protocols. The typical mainstay for ALS has been just use of compensatory strategies. And with that being said, we find that exercising to the point of fatiguing yourself actually may increase the neurologic deterioration of your speech and swallow muscles. So if we were to have you do speech drills and repeat specific words over and over again, the thought would be that potentially your speech may be worse by the time you're finished with those activities. And then I know there are other researched exercises out there, maybe for Parkinson's. I don't know if anyone has ever heard these before, such as Lee Silverman voice treatment. But those have been said not to use with ALS because they are too demanding and fatiguing on the speech and swallow muscles. There has, however, recently, I would say in the past few years, there's come out with something called the Expiratory Muscle Strength Trainer. Shorthand is EMST. And there's a picture here on the screen, but what it is it's a one-way spring-loaded pressure valve that the user blows into. So basically, but also briefly, you would blow into this device until you reach a sufficient pressure to overcome the valve and it opens. And then you would hear this whooshing sound of air rushing through, and that signals that you did what you were supposed to.
Question, Stephanie.
Sure, yeah.
Is that they use for the forced vital capacity?
So we use the forced vital capacity as a determine if it's a good candidate or not, but it's not. Respiratory also has different types of devices like this, but
Okay.
Different kind of ideas. I think there's one that's like the spirometry where they blow into it and a thing pops up. Like
That's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, that's definitely different than this device itself.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So recent research has shown that with this EMST device, it can help maintain or even improve one's cough strength and airway clearance and maintain the swallow function for as long as possible with those who have ALS. Which is great because we want to maintain swallowing for as long as we can, but we also want to be able to maintain our cough, because if things go down the wrong tube towards our lungs, we hope that we have a strong enough cough to potentially eject anything that went the wrong way. So who is a good candidate for EMST? Because not all those with ALS will be a good candidate for it. So like Mary was mentioning, that FVC, that forced vital capacity, That's something that your respiratory therapist should be measuring if you do go into ALS clinic. And essentially that's just how much air a person can exhale during a forced breath. Normal FVC for a normal individual is anywhere between 70 and 80%. And for us to be able to use this device with you, we have to have you be 60% or greater. If you're below that level, we say that at that point, this device would no longer be appropriate. Here at the VA, if we're interested in this device and if we feel you're appropriate for it, we have you come into the speech therapy clinic and we do an evaluation to confirm that you are indeed a good person for the device. We also require doctor's approval for use of the device. So just to continue a little more on how you use this device, after you've been seen by the speech therapist, we determine kind of what 50% of your max expiratory exhale is. And then essentially what we do is you would do this program for about 8 total weeks. It takes place 5 times per week. You would blow into the device and you want to do 25 breaths per day. It's very important that we don't overexert ourselves or put over effort into using this device because like I mentioned, we don't want to fatigue you. After you're done with the 8 total weeks, we would then have you do more of a maintenance program with the device for three times per week, essentially. I don't know if this would be a good time just to pause because I'm going to move on to speech. That was kind of what I had today for swallowing. Are there any specific questions right now in regards to swallowing before I move on?
Yes,
oh. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm questioning if feeding tubes are really, do they extend life or are they just kind of a intermediary thing?
Sure, great question. So that would be something we definitely want to ask the neurologist. From my knowledge, it's more of a prolonging life. I believe the research shows it doesn't extend life too long, years, but that would be something that you would want to speak with your neurologist about.
Okay, thank you.
I think
Yeah, in the chat.
Rose.
Yep.
Yeah, so let's see here. Can you talk more about the benefit of the PEG tube in minimizing muscle loss? Yes. So the idea with the PEG tube is that we're going to get enough nutrition in every single day and hydration to keep your body running. If we were to not have enough nutrition or adequate nutrition via food and liquid alone via mouth, what that would result in is you're losing your muscle mass. You're losing the energy, the ability to essentially move your muscles all over your body. So the idea with the PEG tube is if you were to supplement maybe orally eating or even do full nutrition via PEG tube, if that's deemed the safest, you would be hopefully maintaining the amount of muscle you already have in your body and it wouldn't be wasting away because you're getting enough calories in via that feeding tube. Please let me know if that did not answer your question. No problem.
Oh, Daryl's got something.
Sure.
I asked Dr. Fee Joe's question,
Sure.
and his answer to me
Yes.
was it's a quality of life issue, that you don't choke and get pneumonia as often by using the PEG tube rather than choking and swallowing and going down the wrong tube.
Yeah.
Overhead.
That's a very, very good point to make. I know I have some veterans come and tell me that it's just so uncomfortable to eat and drink via mouth. And so it uncomfortable and just not a fun experience anymore. So in order to hopefully maintain your nutrition and hydration, that PEG tube would be an alternate source for that. Definitely.
Anybody else have any questions about this portion? I think we're good, Stephanie.
Okay, wonderful. I'm going to shift gears then to more of dysarthria or difficulty speaking. So the fancy term for speech difficulties that we use is that dysarthria. And it is quite common with those who have ALS. There is, to kind of get more technical, there's upper motor neurons and lower motor neurons that are involved in this type of dysarthria. We kind of qualify it as a mixed dysarthria. So some speech characteristics that you might find yourself having or hearing could be that of imprecise consonants, so it's not clear and crisp as it could be. Hypernasality or nasal emission. So there's air escaping through your nose when you're speaking when it should really be coming from your mouth. Your voice may sound harsh. You may feel strained from a vocal quality standpoint, and you may hear someone actually inhale. So like an audible inspiration with that. So how does ALS affect speech? So it's a progressive decline in that muscular function, and your speech involves many muscles. It's important to know that it's not a uniform decline. So I'm sure everyone here has come to know that your course of ALS may be much different than the next person's course with ALS. So how speech declines and how fast it declines varies from one individual to another. Changes in speech production skills can definitely be frustrating and isolating for the person with ALS and their communication partners. So our role as the speech therapist is to support your communication and help find the most efficient way for you to communicate along the course of your disease. So to kind of start us off here, we can definitely offer some basic speech strategies to help maximize how intelligible you are with your speech. So some suggestions we may provide are things such as separating your words and phrases with pauses, making sure you're using a slow rate of speech. We may want you to over-enunciate, so really move the muscles in your face and mouth if you can to get that clear speech out. Like I mentioned, taking more frequent breaths or using phrasing will help. Breath support is very important for speech, so we want to make sure we have an adequate amount of air that we can use. If we can, we want to speak face-to-face with our communication partner. We want to reduce or eliminate background noise. So for anyone, a noisy environment results in difficulty communicating, and if we're already having trouble speaking, just kind of getting rid of that TV noise or the car radio may help you be understood more easily. If we can, maybe we can use context clues or kind of establish the topic of conversation before you start it with your spouse or your children or your friends. You may even want to have an alphabet board out in front of you, and you kind of, any way you can, gesture to that first letter of the word to kind of start off the communication. And I'm going to talk about this on later slides, but there is a potential to even use like a voice amplification device.
And I just want to throw in the loan closet at the chapter, we have voice amplifiers.
Yes, and when I get to my slide, but we at the VA can issue those as needed. No problem. They can just get easily sent to your home as well.
Okay.
Some basic communication strategies for partners. So spouses, family, friends, whoever you're talking with. Like I mentioned, establish the topic of conversation so everyone's on the same page. Allowing extra time for the person with ALS to compose their message is very important. Just because they're taking longer doesn't mean that they can't say what they're wanting to say. They just need that extra time. If it's comfortable, repeating parts of the message back to the person with ALS can make sure that everyone is understanding what you're saying, or simply just asking for them to repeat. And then if that person with ALS desires, the communication partner could maybe even finish the sentence or thought if needed. So planning ahead with communication is very important with ALS. Early intro of alternate forms or that AAC of communication is essential. We as speech therapists, and Kellie as well, we can definitely explore different communication options and trial different methods to ensure the most functional communication can take place. I know here at the VA, we always tell our patients, we never want you to not feel like you can communicate. Communication is an essential part of life, and we want to be able to hopefully help you find some way to still have your voice be heard. So we're going to start with more low-tech communication options. So these are considered to be low or no-tech options. So if it's just getting too difficult to get your speech, your verbal speech out, we could use things such as communication boards. I have some pictures on the next slide, but I have some physical objects too. We could potentially use communication notebooks. We can use maybe even just paper and pencil, dry erase boards, if we're still able to write. If we need to, we can trial maybe eye gaze or adaptive pointers, laser pointers to select parts of messages on a board. Maybe even use an eye blink system. Or, like I mentioned, that voice amplification device. So these are just some pictures on the screen here of some low-tech options. I kind of have some here in person. So this is more of a pocket notebook here. And there's different tabs on the side. And then each tab corresponds to kind of different areas that you may need to be talking about. And there's a picture form, there can be a written form, but there could be options for like bathing, eating and drinking, just general greeting. So this is more of a pocketbook for that. We also have a larger version of it that's more of a handheld, but the same idea. There's many different tabs as you can see in it. And if you flip to each one, you can see kind of different ideas in it. We also have more basic communication boards where it's just a picture-based system. If you're able to point, whether that's eye gaze, physical point, using a laser pointer, there's simple yes, no choices. If I was to flip it over, there's many different picture options for immediate needs. And then there's even an alphabet board down here for you to spell out what you're trying to say. We also, I don't have it here with me today, but even have like a full page that's just an alphabet-based board. Those are some of the low-tech options that here at the VA we can definitely offer. And if I am correct, I know Frederick probably has the same type of choices. And then that voice amplification device. So what this is it's a speaker-based system. So you get a set of headphones just like I'm wearing today, and that connects to essentially a speaker. The man in the picture has one around his belt, but there's also a portable one where it would just hang down from your neck and it would be a speaker about this big. And this voice amplifier device, if your speech is still intelligible, but we're just noticing you're quieter, it can help amplify what you're able to do. My veterans love it when they're in a noisier environment. They have been telling me too that when they're more fatigued at the end of the day and they just can't get that loud, robust voice out, putting the voice amplifier on helps kind of supplement what you're able to do when you're feeling more tired. And it sounds like they have some at where Mary's at, but we also at the VA can, issue those out as well if we feel it's appropriate, and I'm sure Frederick can as well.
Yeah, the benefits for the veterans are definitely different. So with those voice amplifiers, we do borrow a lot out from our loan closet.
Okay. Then I'm briefly going to touch on some high-tech communication options, but then I'm going to hand it over to Kellie. She is the expert in it that I would love to hear from what she has to say. But from a high-tech communication option, we do have multiple different ways we could go. So you may hear the term speech generating devices or potentially just SGD. And so this would involve more of an evaluation process. We would have to obtain equipment if needed and potentially even work on training with the device. So you can use things such as electronic devices. So you can use an iPad or an iPhone. You can use like apps on your phone, and I have a few listed here, communication apps that where you can type in what you're wanting to say and then it speaks from your phone. I know you can save messages even through that app as well. There are various keyboard styles. You can potentially even pre-record your messages. And Kellie will get into more of like the positioning and mounting aspects of it. Or if you're unable to use your hands, alternate access methods. And you may hear that electronic devices may be dedicated speech devices. So what you're using the device for and what it's made for is for speech generating, or potentially non-dedicated devices. So you can use it for your speech and for communication, but it also may involve a computer system as well within that tablet. These are just some pictures of some examples of more higher tech options. There's a variety of complexity levels. On one of these pictures, it's the Go Talk, and that's more of a button-based system where we would make pictures that could be placed into the device, and then you would just press it for you to talk. But you also then have ones where you can type out your exact message and have it talk for you that way. Now, while AAC is a great alternate method of communication, I did just want to briefly touch on some potential limitations to it. And just to be aware of, I don't by no means think this is a large barrier, but things to think about. It can be time consuming. And so just knowing that it's going to take longer to communicate. And kind of goes off of that spur of the moment idea. You definitely can be involved in a conversation, but letting your communication partners know, hey, I just need a second to respond. If you're in a noisy group setting, we would prefer you to potentially eliminate any background noise if needed. And there might be a learning curve. If you're not familiar with that high-tech communication, iPad tablet, it may take some time to learn, but it's definitely doable. So in summary, there's many factors that determine someone's ability to use that AAC or alternate method of communication. We can only imagine how frustrating and potentially socially isolating it could be. But please know that there are multiple options that we are wanting and willing to try with you, from low tech, no tech, to that high tech kind of arena. So if we are feeling that we have trouble, we are here to help you. Now, I think that's all I had for my part. Are there any questions for me on speech or swallowing before Kellie jumps in on the more high tech area of communication?
I just wanted to ask real quick, and I'm not sure if this was something you and Kellie were going to touch on, was voice banking. Is that just a whole nother group, or has Kellie got that?
Nope, Kellie has that, I believe, later on in her slides.
Thank you.
Stephanie, can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
I've just finished the EMSTM event, and that's gone fine.
Sure.
I'm not very hungry, so I've been doing nutrition supplements. I enjoy decaf coffee, and I've been putting Ensure in it.
Okay.
What I'm noticing just recently is now I'm starting to get a little congestion in my throat. So I'm doing that chin tuck that you mentioned.
Sure.
And doing that, and so far it's going okay.
Okay.
My question is, does the kind of liquid that I'm drinking and the temperature of it contribute to that throat reaction?
Yeah, great question. So it sounds like that decaf coffee is what we consider to be just a regular old thin liquid. So there's no really thickness to it, but that Ensure definitely has a little bit of thickness to it. I believe here at the VA, we consider it to be a little thicker than regular liquids, maybe even close to that nectar thick liquid. And so the thought is that if someone's having trouble swallowing, they're going to probably have trouble swallowing that thin liquid because it may go down into the throat before your brain is ready to swallow and go down the wrong pipe or cause you to have the symptoms that you're experiencing. So thicker liquids may help eliminate that sensation or make it safer to swallow.
So basically, I'm better off continuing the use of the Ensure in the coffee because it thickens.
Sure.
Okay.
Yes, it does. And correct. But I also want to put kind of a caveat there that that's what we typically see. But sometimes thicker liquids aren't actually safer. Sometimes that chin tuck does not actually work. So how we for sure know what is safest is by doing that video swallow study so that we can for sure see with those x-rays, yes, we're safely swallowing X, Y, and Z, or no, that chin tuck doesn't work. Thick liquids aren't working. What do we do now?
So maybe I'll request that study then.
I think that would be a great idea. If you're unsure of difficulty swallowing, or if you feel like you're having more difficulty swallowing, I would definitely highly recommend, strongly recommend even, getting a video swallow study done so we know where we're at and can move forward from there.
Thank you very much.
Of course.
Okay, I think that's it.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
You
no
gonna stay with
problem.
us, Stephanie, or do you have to go?
No, I'm going to stay with you if that's okay.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
no problem.
Okay, Kelly.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was great. So one of the things that I just want to piggyback, actually a couple off of what Stephanie had shared in terms of different types of AAC, like our no tech or high tech and low tech, is that what we often find is that it's not an all or nothing. You know, even if you move to high tech, we always want to make sure you have a low tech communication board in place, a boogie board. You know, just as we communicate via telephone, via email, via text messaging, AAC is the same way, right? It's just not one method of communication. So and the other piece of it is we don't ever want to look at any of these systems as giving up on your voice. It could be either just preserving your voice in the morning. So if you have a function, say later in the day, your voice is stronger, or just using the AAC for small pieces of communication to get your point across, and your voice the other pieces. So definitely mixing and matching it up is great. And I am not seeing the PowerPoint on my screen though. Oh, there we go. Okay, super, thanks. Okay, so I cover all of, I know most of you know me, but I do cover half of the state. I have been with Tobii Dynavox for 12 years. I'm fortunate enough to be a part of the Freighted ALS clinic, where many of you probably have seen me. And I work with a great team over at the VA. So I'm just really grateful to be you know, part of everything and to have met so many wonderful people along the way. So great. So this is there's a really big difference in between the process of obtaining AAC equipment through the VA versus obtaining it through, say, Freighted or any outpatient facility. Through the VA, and maybe Stephanie, I could have you jump back in, and you obviously know that process a little bit better inside and out.
So here at the VA, what we would do is that, like I mentioned, if we're looking to to see if a high-tech communication device would be appropriate. We would have the veteran come into our facility to do a full evaluation with us. Sometimes we have Kellie there, or sometimes she comes in for that second part of the evaluation. If we feel the veteran is appropriate for a high-tech AAC device, we would then figure out what specific device is going to be the one we choose. And then at that time, we would receive essentially a quote from Kellie if we're going through Dynavox or which program we're going through. We would send that off to our prosthetic department here at the VA. I'm hoping that veterans on this call know what the prosthetic department is. It's quite a familiar service here. They would approve the device and order it for us. And then we would receive the device and get it set up for you. If I am on the ones that I've worked with, it's no cost to the veteran.
So it looks quite a bit different when going through commercial insurance rather than VA. So likewise with at the VA determining whether or not there's a need for a high-tech device or even the desire for one, we would then get an order from one of the physicians. So in this case over at Freighter, it's either Dr. Fee or Dr. Sharilla. And then we would set up a time for that augmentative communication evaluation. At that point, the devices are brought in to trial to determine what would be the most appropriate fit. And how we determine that is a couple of things. One, we're going to look at your current what we would call your access abilities and access skills. So we're going to look at whether you have some good fine motor function. Do you have the ability to touch a screen well? Are you having any weakness in your arms or any of your other extremities? Because unlike with the VA, our insurances typically only are going to cover a device once every 5 years. You know, there are exceptions to that rule, but that is the Medicare rule, and most of our commercial insurances will follow that. So we want to make sure that you're set up with a system that's not only going to be beneficial for you now and today, but also in the long run. And as I flip through some of the slides, you're going to see different devices. And then I'll kind of come back to this on how it's important, you know, to have something that you can use right now. But we also don't want to get you into something so big that you're not going to feel comfortable, you know, going to, you know, I don't know, let's see, I'm trying to think of one of the concerts, Jackson Brown, and being able to take a big device and to say how great that song just was, right? We want something to be, you to be able to use this wherever you go. At that point, once we've determined what the most appropriate equipment is going to be, both from a device hardware standpoint, that accessibility standpoint, and also the software features, then the speech therapist is going to write a report. It is a rather extensive report they have to write. So we want to applaud all our speech therapists for the work that they do. And then we obtain a prescription, again, you know, in our clinics from either Dr. Sharilla or Dr. Fee. And we also get a packet of your last face-to-face visit notes. And all of that gets compiled in one big packet and gets submitted to the funding teams, whether it's through Tobii Dynavox or other vendors. And then it will go to the insurance company. More often than not, these devices are covered in full. Our Medicare plans, so whether it's, you know, straight Medicare or many of the commercial Medicare plans, will cover this equipment at 80%. And then we do have state funding in place that will cover the balance. When it comes to commercial plans, it's very difficult to say until we're able to run the benefits, but no, these are considered to be a funded piece of durable medical equipment and are mostly covered through your insurance. Once you receive the equipment, we work directly with the speech the speech therapist to determine the best course of setup, support. Oftentimes, it's me going into the home to make sure that you're set up with things. But we piggyback with the speech therapist if you want additional therapy time with them as well, just to kind of organize and make your device more efficient. We can do that too. So we just kind of work as one big team. So that's a little bit about the funding process. And now we'll take a look at some of the features that you can see in devices. So as you can see here, this is one of our hardware solutions. Again, there's many different kinds of devices out here, but this is actually an eye gaze device. And you can see on the back, we design these devices with the communication needs in mind, right? So we want something with powerful speakers, okay? When we buy an iPad off the shelf and you're in the living room, it's hard if your wife is downstairs getting the laundry for her to be able to hear that you need something, unless you may have a separate Bluetooth speaker or use baby monitors, which is a great solution too. If nobody's ever brought those up, I very much encourage those even with the use of devices, because let's say your spouse is out gardening or in the garage or again downstairs, it just gives you all peace of mind that you are going to be heard if you're in separate environments. Okay, so you can flip. All right, so here's just a couple different pictures of different tablet devices. Again, over on the right, it's just basically an iPad with a case. You have smaller devices, you have medium-sized devices. So again, it's really all dependent upon what size buttons are necessary for vision and also for access, and then making sure that whatever you're comfortable with are things that we can grow onto down the road should things progress and we have to look at different ways to access the system. So here you can see a couple different eye gaze devices. And as I mentioned before, one of the downfalls with obtaining an eye gaze device, if you are, if you're ambulatory and you're walking through the zoo with your grandchildren, is they're pretty heavy, right? They're pretty big. It's not going to be something you can just stuff in your purse. But again, it's kind of that balancing act. Like, oh, I need this device. I can't use it now though. So I want something to be able to, that's small. And this is where Stephanie kind of brought up some of these other ideas of there's downloadable apps. There's many out there available for all different kinds of mobile phones now. And we also do have tablets that have the ability then to attach the eye gaze camera on later on down the road, should you need it. We definitely don't have a crystal ball, and we don't know what it's going to look like, but we always want to make sure that we have something that's going to work for you in the long term. The next thing we have that's kind of outside the realm of speech, but I wanted to talk about it now, is sometimes our ALS diagnosis doesn't affect our speech so much, but it more so can impact our ability to use a cell phone or access our TV remotes or operate a computer. And so this is where we do also have like different peripherals are out there. These are just a few. We have cameras that will track your eyes. These can be plugged right into a PC, and just a simple Windows tablet as well, and can control full functionality of that PC for you through the use of your eyes. Okay, our new eye series that we have, that it does have eye tracking. Again, just kind of looking at our folks in mind. We want to make sure it's rugged, it's very, very loud. And then also importantly, it's kind of hard to see here, but there is what we call a rear-facing communication partner window. And it is one of my favorite new features of any device that I've seen out there recently, because it really allows for that natural interaction between you and your communication partners. So previously, I know Stephanie was talking about, to make things more efficient, being able to, kind of start with one letter, and then it could be either we're looking over their shoulder to see what's next. But here, your partner can actually see what you're starting to type on the other side. So again, it allows for a lot more privacy. It's a lot more independence. You don't feel like, somebody's trying to guess what you're saying. I have a story comes to mind of, it was actually a veteran that I was working with quite a few years back. And I was down at the Union Grove facility, and he was not happy about something that had happened earlier in the day. And we were now having a really nice conversation, but he started typing THA, and this was Ricky me. I'm like, oh, you're welcome. And he got this look on his face, and he was really angry, because here I'm thinking he's saying thank you to me, and he was still trying to tell me something that had happened very negative earlier in the day. So, we would never want to presume we know what somebody's thinking. And so having the communication partner window, and especially giving, somebody with a system, whether it's that low tech or no tech or high tech, just that room and that time to convey their messages and not talk for them is so incredibly important. All right, so I'm going to talk about a little bit more about our access methods, because often what we see is like people jump from I can't use a touchscreen anymore to I need eye gaze. And I think it's really important to know that there's a lot of different things in between. Not everybody is a strong component or a strong candidate for eye gaze. It can be fatiguing. There is a learning curve to it. And it's certainly not the quickest way to communicate. And for that being said, any type of AAC is never going to be able to replace the speed of your voice. When somebody asks me, basically, is this going to be the answer to, all of my woes with speech? I can't. It won't. We want it to help, but it's not going to replace how quick your natural speech has been. So using it just more as filling in the gaps. And as I said previously, maybe, in the morning when your speech is a little bit stronger, using it periodically so you're saving some of that strength throughout the day are ways to really have some good strategies to save that. So partner facing. So the partner facing, so Kathy had a question here about qualifying for the partner facing screen. So that's a good question. So that is a device that is a little bit different than I know what Kathy you have seen before. So that is unlike the tablet with the eye gaze separately, it's an all-in-one system. So, you and I can definitely talk about where we lie in the system of, qualifying for a device every 5 years. Sound good? Okay. All right. So some of the other access methods that you can see here, we see people using a touch screen. We see people using scanning. And you would think that it is a very slow process to actually have to scan through each button. So what you're seeing here is a button that is wired into the device. Some are attached via Bluetooth, but it scans through each button. And when it gets to the one you want, you activate the switch. So the downfalls to this could be any progressing weakness of our origin of scanning selection. So let's say you're using your hand to select and activate that switch. If you continue to progress and you become reliant on that scanning, now we have to move forward and look for another access method. A joystick works as a mouse. So we do have quite a few people using a joystick method too. So basically it will go across the screen, say an alphabet board on your computer screen. And when you get to the letter that you want to select, you hover over that letter for a select or a determined period of time, and it will select that letter for you. So you can see with those two methods how time consuming it could be to be able to complete an entire message. The next one is a head mouse. And a lot of times people think when I say the word head mouse, this is an apparatus I have to wear on my head. But really all it is the ability to either utilize an external camera on a device or a tablet, or the internal camera in a tablet or computer that works with software to recognize your head movement. And again, just like with the joystick, when you move your head over to a selected icon and hold it on for a determined period of time, it will activate that button. Why would I use head mouse over eye tracking? For some people, eye tracking cameras do not work adequately with people's eyes. It also could be too fatiguing. The downfall of a head mouse is that we have to really determine whether or not you continue to have good head control, okay? And then finally, the eye tracking piece of things. So eye tracking is where either an external camera, like you saw before, or the internal camera of a device is going to pick up your eyes, and it's going to follow where your eyes track to the screen. And I have another slide just like 2 slides below that'll give a little bit more detail into how eye tracking works. All right, so it's pretty straightforward. Your eye tracker is going to send out some infrared light. That light is then reflected in your eyes, and those reflections, or sometimes we call them glints, they are picked up by the eye tracker's cameras. There is a whole bunch of algorithms that go into determining how that eye tracker tracks your eyes specifically. But once we determine that algorithm through a process called calibration, then your eyes are going to be tracked appropriately on the screen. Oops, I'm sorry. So our optimal positioning, which is really the success to eye gaze, is achieved through what we call our track status box. Any eye gaze system, whether you're using, a Tobii Dynavox, or you've seen other systems, or just an access camera, this is the most important piece to eye tracking. So it's determining what position the device or tablet should be in relationship to your head and your eyes. And the guesswork is taken out of it for you through these track status boxes. My rule of thumb is we always are going to position these systems to the user, and we're never going to try to position the user to the device. If we try to do that and adjust you and prop you with pillows and all of that, it's just not going to be comfortable for you, and you're not going to be relaxed enough to be able to use it and enjoy communicating with it. All right, so some different mounting solutions. We'll just kind of go through these quickly, but really the importance of mounting is to get the devices in a good position for you. Sometimes someone may not need mounting. Sometimes, you're going to carry your device, in your purse or strapped over your body, and that is just fine. Other times we need to be able to either securely attach it to a wheelchair. We may want to have it on a stand next to, your recliner or your bedside, or a hospital bed, so that you have access to the device at all times. So here you can just kind of see a list of some of the different kind of mounts that we have. And again, the most important reason being is to be able to access your communication device wherever you are. So we'll roll through the different software quickly. So we have various different kinds of software, some of which you can just download onto your phone if need be, onto an iPad. We have some free versions too, and we just want to make sure you're set up with something. So I do want to dig in a little bit into the Communicator 5 software that we have, just because one of the things we find is that, yes, we're talking about speech, but sometimes, this diagnosis is going to take away some of our other abilities, such as, being able to jump on Facebook, or to control our lights, to change our TV channels, to watch Netflix, just to do some of these things that, we've become so accustomed to doing, and we want to be able to use the software for things other than just communication. So we've partnered with other companies, and I'll flip to the next slide, to allow us to do that. And you can see just one of their screens here, and you can see Netflix on here, Spotify, we've got Audible, Zoom, YouTube, Instagram. I know we even have TikTok on here now. But these are all apps that have been made available for individuals that need assistance with access. So if you're no longer able to touch that screen, to hit your like on Facebook, these apps create bigger buttons that are accessed again, either through that switch scanning or eye gaze or head mouse, to be able for you to continue on doing all of these great things that you've been used to doing. Some people have no desire to do anything on the computer. They just tell me, you know what, I just want something straight up for communication. So we have those options too. I know a big wave over the past few years has been integrating these speech devices with automated home systems like your Alexa and Google Home. These systems work amazing for that, because the speech voices that are in these devices are picked up very well through home automation. So things like, Alexa, turn on Christmas music, Alexa, call mom. So it's a really nice way to integrate those environmental controls very easily with the speaking devices. I know there's companies out there too now. I just looked one up for the Heinz VA. It was for, they now have voice activated hospital bed controls. And so they can integrate, you're having your speech device, you have your Alexa, and then you have your voice controlled bed. So, and you can just take it all the steps further. People are doing garage doors this way. They're doing, again, like your TVs, but anything that Alexa can do, you'll be able to control that way. So here's just an example of what communication software can look like for you. You have access to a keyboard to create what we would, a spontaneous message, but then very importantly, you have categories that you can then store your more commonly used phrases under for more efficient communication. This is the piece that's really, really important. If you decide that you just want to use a keyboard at all times, even using the word and phrase prediction in softwares, it is going to become quite laborious if your access starts to require the eye gaze. So we really want to set you up ahead of time and start thinking about those phrases that you use. And you know, it's not going to just be, I need help. Roll me over, get me water. You know, we really want you to think about your own personality, you know, things that you would want to say to your kids and things that, you know, your pet names for your loved ones. So make it your own. So now I'm talking about making it your own. We're going to take it, that personalization, one step further. So I am a really big advocate for both message banking and voice banking. And I'm going to start my story off with one of my first veterans that I helped. He was actually, honestly, he was the first veteran that I worked with through the Milwaukee VA. And he had banked about 200 some phrases. And we'll dig into what that means in a minute. But he had recorded these phrases, and at the time, the system to take these phrases and store them looked incredibly different than it is now. He recorded them. They were on little files, and I had to independently put them on buttons. And when I brought his device back out to him, they had a full remodel, so they were resetting things up, and he had new caregivers. And he went to his keyboard and he was typing with his eyes some different things, answering different questions. We were just chatting about all the great things they had done in the house. And I said, oh, hey, wait a second. You got a bunch of people here that haven't heard your voice. And so where are those bank messages we worked on? And so he went to his customized file and he started talking, and his dog, who was clear on the other end of the house, heard his voice and came running and just laid down on his feet. And it was that moment for me that I'm like, I will definitely be the biggest message banking advocate out there. You know, when we think about how important our voice is to who we are, it's not just for individuals that may have a diagnosis that may lead to our voice no longer being around, right? You know, I know when my grandma passed away, to like still be able to hear her voice on an outgoing voice message, thinking about it in a fun way. My boys are grown adults now, but when they had that squeaky little voice before it changed, we recorded them. Okay. I think of your voice as like a personal thumbprint. And so if you have a chance to do some of this message banking, I strongly, strongly encourage it. Even if you don't feel like you would never put it on a device or want a device, just bank a few messages for yourself and your family. So message banking, I'm sorry, can we just back up one more? Thanks. Okay. So what message banking is, a lot of people use these terms interchangeably. So I'm going to break it down. So message banking is the digital recording and storing of words, phrases, and sentences, okay, individually. So they become individual files that we can use at a later time. Okay. So Libby had put here, you know, come here, Lucy, and that's her dog. So what happens with a banked message is we could then later on down the road, retrieve your actual voice, actual recording, and put it on a device. So the difference in voice banking, that's our next slide here. So voice banking is a process in that you're going to record a set list of phrases. And usually these are determined by a third-party voice banking company. And what they then do is they take those recordings and they produce a synthetic voice for you. So some of you, if you've not heard, you know, the speech devices before, I'm going to give you an example. We've all called in to pay our credit card, and you know, it'll say enter your account information, and or say your account information, and you say it, and it spits it back to you in what we call a synthesized voice. right? So it's an electronic voice. It doesn't spit it back to you in your own voice. Some individuals are not happy with the synthesized voices of devices, and completely understandable. They're not your voice. So by banking a voice, it creates your own unique speech engine. I am going to be just honest with the feedback over the years that I've been given on voice banking. I've never had somebody say, I'm sorry I've done it, but I've had people be disappointed that that doesn't sound like me. So I never want people to feel like I'm going to do this and this is going to be my voice. I want you to think of it as it's taking bits and pieces of your voice, right? And it's creating this engine for you. So just like when that computer on the other end of the phone line, you know, is saying back to you the digits on your credit card, that doesn't sound like the person who created that recording. Okay, so it will bear some resemblance, but it's not going to be a perfect match. So to that point, we now have a perfect hybrid. We'll go to the next slide. Here is some of the different voice banking options. And so we have a couple that I'm going to really highlight here, is called the Acapella My Own Voice and the Voice Keeper. And the reason I want to highlight these is that what they'll do, instead of taking their own set of phrases that they think you should record, they will take those personalized bank messages. So, you know, your loved one's names, you know, go Packers. Hey, that was an amazing Grand Slam, Vogelbach, all of these things, right? That are unique to you, what you would say, and they can create a voice banked engine for you. And it does not take nearly as much time as it does for some of these other voice banking companies. So if you're at all interested in message banking or voice banking, I'm happy to talk more about it, but this chart here is really going to give you a super breakdown. There's one that's not on here now, and I would have to look up the name, but we recently had a woman who had done none of this. She had not message banked. We had maximum of about 15 minutes of pulled together from family phone recordings, phone messages, and none of these companies here would touch it. They said, we just don't have enough to do anything. We worked with Gleason, and there was a company overseas, and now I'm kicking myself that I can't remember, but there is a company, and they put together an amazing speech engine for her. It was one of the best synthesized speech. Yep.
Just in case people don't know about Team Gleason, can you explain when you said Gleason?
Yeah. So Team Gleason is a great organization that provides a lot of resources for the ALS community. It was founded through Steve Gleason of the New Orleans Saints, who was diagnosed with ALS. I'm not sure. Mary, do you know at what age he was diagnosed?
No, I don't know the age, but it's
he was
been
very
a long
young.
time.
Yeah. And you know, he was, you know, quite young. And so he and his wife made it their mission to develop this organization to provide resources to the ALS community. So they assisted us in finding this company overseas, and they did a fabulous job in creating that voice. So again, just like talking about devices, you know, it doesn't have to be low tech or high tech. It can be both. It doesn't have to be message banking or, you know, voice banking. It can be both. And that's why your speech teams, you know, and people such as myself and, you know, the ALS Association are here to make sure you have the tools to navigate, you know, all of these different options for you. So if you were to bank your messages, we have a free service that we've partnered with the Boston Children's Hospital on, and it allows you to store your messages on a site for later use. And what's nice is you can just dump your messages into here, and then you can tag them. So we talked about, organizing your phrases to make retrieval much more efficient. So when you're talking about, again, the Packer game, pulling up, football, and giving you some of those more often phrases that you're going to use. So you can take your messages and you can tag them into what category you think you would probably use them later on down the road. And then should you need a device at some point, this allows it to just within a matter of minutes, pull those messages down into the category that you've chosen, and then they're ready to use. All right, so how do we message bank? What equipment is required? We need a high quality voice recorder. Some people will do it on your phones. Is it okay? Yes. Is it going to be the highest quality? No, but it's worked. So don't feel like you have to go out and get anything high tech. The great thing is that I know that both the VA and the ALS Association keeps a stock of these recorders in their libraries for people to use. And it's just been, great knowing that these can come out, they can use them, and when they're finished using them, that they can go and be back to the library for someone else. Things to know before starting. Again, if you're going to start message banking on your phone, the biggest thing you need to remember is to record in a WAV format. You want to record each phrase, word, or sound as its own file. So you do not want to start recording and say, I love you, it's great to see you, I need to use the bathroom. You want to be able to stop after each sentence so it can be saved and tagged in separate categories. Some people like to sit down at a computer and bank their messages that way. I love the voice recorders. The reason being, right here, carry the voice recorder with you for a week or two. You will be surprised at the messages that you can think of that you say throughout the course of your day that you wouldn't think of if you're sitting at a computer. It much better captures a good snapshot of your actual voice and communication needs. Try to record in quiet places. I think you heard before my dog barking, not a good option. And again, don't overwhelm yourself. A lot of people ask for lists. Okay, what do I need to record? This is why it's great to have a recorder to carry around. Record your personality. If you can't tell already, I'm a storyteller. And one of my other favorite stories was I was at Madison VA and I was telling one of our vets, be yourself. It's okay to say cuss words. We all say them. It's okay. And he felt very uncomfortable. So I told him a story about some audio files that I had received back from one of our clients who had done quite a bit of voice banking. And when I went to take them all onto buttons, I had 4 full pages of what I would consider like truck driving mouth, and it was hilarious, but it was part of her personality. And again, that's what we want. We want your personality to spill over into your messages. So here's just a couple more suggestions for success. Try to make those recordings during the time that you know that you're more rested up, that your voice is stronger. Take those deep breaths that Stephanie had mentioned before to really, give yourself that more strength in your voice. Take as many breaks as you need, and really just try to keep that sense of humor during all of your recordings. So here's just a quick picture of what that message bank looks like. We upload them and then they just dump right on down into your buttons. And I think that's it. Any
Thank you
questions?
guys. Oh my gosh, you guys, that was so awesome. Yeah, does anybody have any questions? I have a couple, but I'll wait until everybody else talks. And if you do have a question, you're probably muted, so unmute yourself.
I just want to say thank you. It's Maggie. That was wonderful. So thorough from both women.
Yes, I agree.
After we're done with this general question and answer, I have a question about iPad or iPhone sync to a TV, just to see if anyone in our group has already done that.
Okay, I'm gonna ask my questions real quick. Eye gaze is wonderful, and whenever someone can use it, it's great, but I don't want people to have the impression that it's like, oh, flip it on and done. It takes work. So when a hospice calls me, you know, a person's on hospice care and they just want to say goodbye to their family, it's too late to learn something like that, correct? It takes some energy and some strength to be able to get that right. Yes, Kelly?
It does. It does. It's not some, I think that people, we're accustomed nowadays to technology, like getting a new phone and I'm just going to learn it. And, you know, when you think about how eye gaze has to work, you're not only learning new language layout, right? Like how does my computer look? But now I'm learning to use my eyes and thinking about running a marathon, right? We don't start, you know, we don't put on or lace up our shoes and say, I'm going to go run 26 miles. It doesn't work like that. We're going to get out and first we crawl, you know, then we start walking and now we're going to train for a little bit. So it takes a while to get our eyes up to that strength. And I always tell people 15 minutes at a time. And so often I will go out and unbox somebody and, you know, they want to navigate and surf the web. And that's just, they've set their expectations way too high.
And I'm not trying to discourage anyone because it is a great, and I've seen people amazing how they can whip through that. But I just don't want people, I want people to understand it's not an immediate, that it's going to take some work. So for anyone listening, that they keep that in the back of their minds. And then my only other point was not with the VA, but with everyone's on Medicare, the hospice Medicare benefit.
I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah. So just like most of your DME, if you've signed on to hospice, these devices are no longer covered. There's just not, it's non-negotiable. And there have been a few situations where some really wonderful hospice companies have signed the clients off and then signed back on once they've gotten the equipment. But it also can draw some red flags to the hospice companies, so they become a little bit timid on whether they're going to do that or not. The other piece too is a skilled nursing facility. So Medicare does not cover in a skilled nursing facility either. Some commercial insurances do, and our Medicaid systems do. So oftentimes we'll see that match between Medicare primary and Medicaid secondary. And certainly, although Medicare is not going to cover, Medicaid secondary will pick up the cost. But definitely when we're entering into like those different places of residence, we want to try to obtain the equipment first before we do that. Certainly we would never want to say don't go on to hospice because you may need a device. That's not what we're saying at all. But we're just wanting you to make aware of like kind of the steps that we should take, what, you know, the order that we should try to do things.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Because yeah, in that case, sooner is better. But then again, when you might not qualify for the piece until later. So just to keep that in the back of your mind as well, so that you have that information. Oh, you guys, that was just great. I'm so grateful. And I know I'm going to be sharing this recording with a lot of people. So thank you very, very much. Stephanie, it was so nice to meet you. You're wonderful.